In the late summer of 1866, the air in Bromley hangs thick with the scent of damp earth and horse manure. The roads are uneven, rutted by carriage wheels. Shop signs creak in the breeze. A train whistles somewhere in the distance, a reminder that industry is spreading its iron fingers across England. Inside a modest house on Atlas House High Street, a child is born. His name is Herbert George Wells, later known to the world as H.G.Wells. The room is small. The wallpaper is patterned but fading. Outside, boots strike cobblestone. Inside, there is the smell of soap, starch, and coal smoke drifting in from nearby chimneys. This is not the England of aristocrats and glittering estates. This is lower middle class Victorian England, anxious, striving, unstable. His father, Joseph Wells, keeps a small shop that sells china and sporting goods. It is cluttered and dim. Dust settles on cricket bats and porcelain bowls. Business is unreliable. Some days bring customers, many do not. Joseph also plays professional cricket when he can, dressed in white on wide green fields that smell of cut grass and summer heat. But cricket is seasonal. Money is never secure. His mother, Sarah Neal, works as a domestic servant before her marriage. She carries with her the discipline and hierarchy of service. She understands her place in Victorian society because she has scrubbed its floors and polished its silver. Later, when the family's finances collapse further, she returns to service at Awoke, a large country house in Sussex. There, the contrast between wealth and poverty is stark. Chandeliers above, servants below stairs. Young Herbert sometimes visits. He walks through echoing halls and senses the immense gulf between classes. From the beginning, insecurity shapes his world. The family shop fails, income shrinks, conversations about money happen in low, tense voices behind closed doors. Victorian England is rigid. Class mobility is rare. A boy born into modest means is expected to remain there. Then, at age 7, something happens. He breaks his leg. The accident confines him indoors for weeks. The world outside continues. Cartwheels grinding, vendors calling, church bells marking the hours, but he lies still, restless, frustrated. And then, books, stacks of borrowed volumes appear beside his bed. The pages smell faintly of dust and ink. When he opens them, the room disappears. He travels through history, across oceans into imagined futures. The narrow walls of his family home dissolve into vast landscapes. The injury heals, but something permanent has shifted. Reading is no longer pastime. It is escape. It is expansion. It is power. Outside, England is transforming. Steam engines hiss. Factories multiply. London swells into the largest city in the world. Empire stretches across continents. Yet alongside industrial confidence lies anxiety, overcrowding, poverty, disease. Science is rewriting humanity's place in nature. Charles Darwin's ideas ripple through society, unsettling religious certainty. Young Herbert absorbs all of this, even before he fully understands it. He watches customers enter and leave the shop. He hears adults speak about failure, opportunity, reputation. He observes how wealth grants comfort and how poverty narrows possibility. The sharp smell of metal tools, the chalky dust of broken plaster, the damp wool of second-hand coats. These textures form his sensory education. There is ambition in him, but it is mixed with awareness. He sees how easily families slip downward. He sees how fragile security is. The contrast burns into him. Class is not abstract. It is spatial. It is audible in accents. It is visible in posture. It is present in who gives orders and who obeys them. These early impressions will not fade. In the evenings back in Bromley, gas lamps flicker. The future feels uncertain. Yet the boy who once lay injured now reads with urgency, Adventure stories, scientific texts, histories. His imagination stretches forward in time. What will become of this industrial world? Where does evolution lead? What happens when technology outruns morality? He does not yet write the answers, but the questions are forming. Listen closely to this household, and you hear the origins of later worlds, ticking clocks measuring time, the scratch of pen on paper, the murmur of adult disappointment, the distant rumble of trains that promise movement. Movement becomes everything. For a child born into limited circumstances, imagination is not luxury. It is strategy. It is rehearsal for escape. In Victorian England, many children grow up in similar houses. Few will imagine Martian invasions or distant futures divided by class and evolution. But here, in a modest home above a struggling shop, a boy breathes coal smoke and possibility in equal measure. The surroundings are ordinary, the sounds unremarkable, the smells domestic and industrial. Yet from this environment, unstable, class-conscious, filled with books, emerges a mind already testing the boundaries of time, science and society. The shop falters, the empire expands, and the boy keeps reading. London breathes differently from Bromley. The air is thicker here. Omnibuses rattle over stone, street vendors shout, factory whistles pierce the morning. The city does not pause, it surges. Herbert George Wells arrives not as a gentleman scholar, but as a young man searching for footing. Before London there are apprenticeships, drapers' shops, long counters stacked with folded cloth, the smell of wool and starch, gaslights flickering over endless bolts of fabric. He stands for hours, feet aching, measuring ribbon, wrapping parcels. The bell above the door rings again and again. Customers inspect, judge, haggle. It is suffocating. Behind the counter, he feels as the narrowing of life. Routine presses in. Days repeat with mechanical precision. Victorian commerce runs on obedience and hierarchy. A draper's assistant is expected to be polite, efficient, and silent. But Wells is restless. He becomes a pupil teacher, instructing younger students while continuing his own studies. Chalk dust clings to his sleeves. He discovers something important here. Knowledge is leverage. Education is movement. And then, an opening. A scholarship to the Normal School of Science in South Kensington, London. He steps into lecture halls that echo with intellectual ambition. Polished wooden benches, high windows filtering grey light. Here he studies under Thomas Henry Huxley, the formidable biologist known as Darwin's bulldog. Huxley lectures with clarity and force. Evolution is not speculation here, it is structure. Humanity is not fixed at the centre of creation. It is a species, shaped by natural selection, vulnerable to extinction. The idea lands heavily. In these rooms, Wells absorbs more than biological theory. He absorbs scale, deep time, the immensity of past ages, the instability of dominance. If species rise and fall, why not civilizations? Why not empires? Outside, London expands aggressively, railways stretch outward, slums crowd inwards. Empire appears confident, yet inequality is stark. Carriages roll past barefoot children, wealth and want share the same streets. Inside the laboratory, glass beakers catch the light. Specimens float in preserving fluid, bones and diagrams map the mechanics of life. Wells begins to see the world not as fixed but as dynamic, evolutionary, precarious. But his path is not smooth. He struggles financially. He loses his scholarship after failing to pass certain exams. The academic route wavers. Stability slips again, as it did in childhood. Still, something irreversible has occurred. Science has entered his imagination. He turns increasingly toward writing. Journalism. Essays, short stories. The scratch of pen on paper becomes constant. In boarding rooms lit by weak lamplight, he drafts late into the night. Ink stains his fingers. Outside, carriage wheels grind across wet streets. He marries Isabel Mary Wells, his cousin, in 1891. The marriage feels practical, structured, but it does not last. Within a few years, he leaves her and marries Amy Catherine Robbins, who becomes a stabilising presence in his life. Domestic spaces shift again. New rooms, new routines. Yet writing now dominates his days. He joins the Fabian Society for a time, a socialist intellectual circle advocating gradual reform rather than revolution. Meetings hum with debate. Voices overlap. Papers shuffle. Ideas about class, labour, and the future of society circulate intensely. Wells listens and challenges. He believes society must change fundamentally. Industrial capitalism has created progress, but also division. His childhood memories of Uppark's grand halls and Bromley's struggling shop resurface in sharper focus. Class is evolutionary pressure in human form. The city around him reinforces this view. Walk east and you'll find overcrowded tenements smelling of sewage and smoke. Walk west and you'll find polished clubs with thick carpets and cigars. London is a living diagram of inequality. Wells begins to imagine futures shaped by these pressures. What if humanity continues dividing along class lines? What if science alters the body itself? What if invisible forces shape survival? These are no longer idle thoughts, they are narrative seeds. By the mid-1890s, Wells is no longer merely a student of science. He is transforming scientific principles into speculative fiction. He understands that fiction can carry theory further than lecture halls can. A story can embody evolution. A novel can dramatize social collapse. He senses the moment. The 19th century is closing. Electricity flickers into homes. Telegraph wires hum across continents. New inventions compress time and space. Yet beneath the optimism lies anxiety about degeneration, invasion, moral decay. Wells stands at this threshold. He is not wealthy, he is not fully secure, but he is intellectually armed. Darwinian thought, socialist critique, urban observation, these now combine inside him. In a modest room under the hiss of a gas lamp, he drafts a story about time travel. Not fantasy, but speculation grounded in evolutionary logic. The London night presses against the window. Fog thickens. Somewhere in the distance, machinery pounds rhythmically. He writes as if testing the future itself. The draper's shop is behind him. The lecture hall echoes remain. The laboratory glass and skeletal diagrams have left their imprint. Science has given him a lens. Poverty has given him urgency. London has given him scale. And now the writer begins to emerge. It is 1895. The 19th century feels unstoppable. And into this atmosphere of industrial confidence, Herbert George Wells releases a quiet shock. The Time Machine appears in bookshops. Slim, strange, unsettling. Imagine the scene. A reader sits in a lamplit drawing room. Coal crackles in the grate. The clock ticks. Outside, carriage wheels splash through damp streets. The empire feels secure. Britain rules the seas. And yet on the page, Wells projects the reader hundreds of thousands of years into the future. Humanity is split into two species, the delicate Eloi and the subterranean Morlocks. Above ground, warm air drifts through crumbling architecture. Below, machinery grinds in darkness. The smell of oil and iron lingers in underground tunnels. Victorian class division, refined and industrial, has evolved into biology. Wells does not simply invent a machine that travels through time. He weaponizes evolution. He suggests that inequality, if left unchecked, reshapes humanity itself. The book is a sensation. He follows quickly with The Island of Dr. Moreau. Now the setting shifts. Humid air, dense jungle. the sound of distant surf striking volcanic rock. On an isolated island, a scientist conducts grotesque experiments, reshaping animals into human-like creatures through surgical intervention. The smell here is antiseptic and blood, the atmosphere tense, feverish. Moreau is not a madman in a castle. He is a man of science, driven by curiosity without ethical restraint. Readers feel the unease. Darwin has already destabilised humanity's place in nature. Wells pushes further. If evolution shapes us, can science force it? And at what cost? Again, the Victorian world, confident in its progress, sees its reflection distorted. Then comes the invisible man. This time the setting feels closer to home. A small English village, frost in the air, doors slamming against a winter wind. The smell of ale in a country inn. A scientist discovers invisibility. Not magic, but chemistry and optics. At first it seems miraculous. Then paranoia spreads. Footprints appear in fresh snow with no visible body. Objects move unaided. Fear tightens its grip. Here, Wells explores isolation. What happens when intellect separates itself from society? When brilliance loses empathy? The invisible man is not heroic. He is unravelling, detached from moral boundaries. And then, in 1898, Wells unleashes perhaps his most enduring vision. The War of the Worlds. Listen closely. A quiet English countryside evening. Crickets hum. The sky glows faintly red at sunset. Then, a cylinder crashes from the heavens into Horsell Common. The ground trembles. Curious onlookers gather. The air smells of scorched earth. The cylinder opens. From it emerges not angels or explorers, but Martians, towering, tentacled beings wielding heat rays that incinerate everything in their path. Church bells ring in alarm. Crowds flee. Smoke drifts across the Thames. London, the heart of empire, collapses under alien assault. For Victorian readers, the reversal is profound. Britain has invaded continents for decades. Now Britain is invaded. The empire experiences its own imperial nightmare. Wells uses invasion not as spectacle, but as critique. He exposes fragility. He strips away the illusion of dominance. By 1901, he publishes The First Men in the Moon. Now the air is thinner, silence replaces city noise. Two men travel to the moon using a gravity-defying substance. There they encounter the Selenites, an organised, hierarchical lunar civilization. The moon is not empty romance, it is political metaphor, specialised castes, efficient structure, collective purpose. Wells is still examining society, always society, even among the stars. Across these novels, patterns emerge. Science is powerful but morally neutral. Evolution is relentless. Class division is dangerous. Empire is vulnerable. Progress is double-edged. Wells writes, in the present tense of possibility. He makes the future feel immediate, physical. Readers smell smoke, hear machinery, feel subterranean dampness. Importantly, these are not fairy tales. He calls them scientific romances, grounding speculation in contemporary theory. The time machine operates within four-dimensional space. Invisibility relies on refractive index. Martians are plausible extraterrestrials, shaped by their own evolutionary pressures. The effect is electrifying. The late Victorian world prides itself on rationality. Wells uses that rationality to undermine comfort. Printing presses run late into the night producing his books. Reviewers debate him in newspapers thick with ink. Railway stations carry his stories across Britain and beyond. He becomes famous. Yet fame does not soften his edge. He is observing modernity accelerating. Electricity spreading, wireless communication emerging, industrialization intensifying. The world feels faster, louder, more interconnected. And beneath it all, Wells asks, where is this leading? In drawing rooms and train compartments, readers grip his novels and confront unsettling visions, not dragons, not medieval quests, but futures shaped by science, class and human ambition. By the turn of the century, H.G.Wells is no longer merely a writer. He is redefining what fiction can do. He turns laboratories into stages, evolution into drama, the future into warning. The city outside continues to roar with confidence, but within his pages the future is already trembling. The 20th century arrives with a different sound. It is louder. Electric trams spark along wet rails. Motor cars cough and rattle beside horse-drawn carriages. Newspapers slap against doorsteps at dawn, heavy with headlines about empire, industry and unrest. The air smells of oil now, not just coal. Steel replaces timber. Speed replaces patience. Herbert George Wells stands in the middle of it, but no longer simply a novelist of speculative futures, but a public intellectual with sharpened convictions. His fame gives him reach. Lecture halls fill with murmuring audiences. Tobacco smoke curls toward high ceilings. Chairs scrape across wooden floors as people settle in to hear him speak about the future of civilization. Meetings unfold in rooms thick with debate, papers shuffle, voices rise and fall. Intellectuals argue over policy, education, economics. Wells grows impatient. Gradualism feels too slow for a world accelerating at mechanical speed. He sees industrial capitalism expanding inequalities he recognized in childhood, only now amplified across continents. Urban poverty festers beside technological brilliance. Imperial rivalries intensify. He begins writing not just stories, but manifestos. In 1901, he publishes Anticipations, predicting future social and technological developments, motorways, suburban expansion, even aspects of aerial warfare. The tone is analytical, almost clinical. He studies trends the way a biologist studies specimens. Society to Wells is evolutionary, adapt or collapse. Then comes the First World War, August 1914. Church bells ring not for celebration but mobilisation. Railway stations fill with young men in uniform. Steam hisses as trains depart. Wells initially supports the war effort, believing it may be the war to end war, a brutal correction that will clear the path for a rational world order. But the trenches tell a different story. Mud swallows boots, artillery shatters landscapes, gas drifts across battlefields in pale, suffocating clouds. Industrialised slaughter replaces romantic notions of glory. The optimism of the Edwardian era dissolves in shellfire. Wells responds not with retreat, but with urgency. He believes humanity must reorganise itself to prevent annihilation. Nationalism, he argues, is outdated. The world has become too interconnected. In 1919, he publishes The Outline of History. It is ambitious, sweeping, a narrative of humanity from prehistoric origins to modernity. Printing presses strain under its length. The book smells of fresh ink and glue as it reaches homes across Britain and beyond. He writes history as if mapping a trajectory, tracing humanity's slow climb from primitive survival toward potential global unity. His message is clear. Civilization must think globally, scientifically, cooperatively. He advocates for a world state, a rationally governed international order guided by knowledge rather than tribal loyalty. To some, it sounds visionary. To others, dangerously utopian. Wells travels. He meets political leaders, thinkers, reformers. He interviews figures like Lenin and Stalin, observing firsthand the experiments unfolding in revolutionary Russia. He studies systems as if comparing social laboratories. The 1920s hum with uneasy recovery. Jazz spills from gramophones. Skyscrapers climb skyward. Aviation compresses distance. Yet beneath the surface lies fragility, Then the 1930s arrive with a different scent: anxiety. Economic depression spreads, factories fall silent, bread lines stretch along cold city streets. In Europe, authoritarian movements gain momentum. Boots march in rigid unison. Flags snap sharply in the wind. Wells watches fascism rise with growing alarm. His earlier faith in inevitable progress falters. The evolutionary model he embraced now feels uncertain. What if humanity does not advance rationally? What if it regresses? He writes darker works. The Shape of Things to Come envisions global war and societal collapse, followed by eventual reconstruction under technocratic governance. It reads less like fantasy and more like forecast. And then another war ignites. Air raid sirens wail over London. Searchlights cut through blacked-out skies. The smell of smoke and dust fills the air as bombs fall during the Blitz. Buildings crumble. Glass shatters across pavements. Wells, now older, observes a second global catastrophe within his lifetime. He had predicted aerial warfare decades earlier. Now he hears it overhead, engines droning through the night. His tone shifts from confident reformer to troubled prophet. The belief that science alone will save humanity feels naive. Science has delivered antibiotics and electricity, but also machine guns and explosives. He continues to argue for global cooperation, but there is strain in his voice, even on the page. The world he once imagined as improvable now teeters. Yet through it all, he refuses silence. He writes essays, commentaries, reflections. He critiques nationalism, militarism, complacency. He insists that education must expand beyond narrow patriotism. He believes survival depends on intellectual honesty. The London around him has changed dramatically since his youth. Motor traffic roars where horses once trod. Wireless signals travel invisibly through air. Planes cross skies that once held only clouds. Modernity has fulfilled many of his predictions and many of his fears. Standing at his desk, papers scattered, the smell of ink sharp and familiar, Wells remains committed to one central conviction. The future is not fate, it is constructed, but construction requires foresight and courage. Outside, the 20th century continues to thunder forward. Inside, H.G.Wells writes as if racing it. Herbert George Wells is an old man. He moves more slowly through rooms lined with books. The desk is familiar. Wood worn smooth where his hands have rested for decades. For half a century he has projected humanity forward into distant futures, alien invasions, global states. Now the future feels compressed into the present. He had believed once that rational thought and scientific understanding would gradually unify humanity. Instead, he sees ideology weaponized, propaganda amplified by radio waves, entire populations mobilized through spectacle and fear. The sounds of the Blitz punctuate his final years. Anti-aircraft guns thud rhythmically. Searchlights sweep the sky like restless fingers. London, that vast organism of commerce and ambition he once knew as a young student, now crouches under threat. He writes one of his final works, Mind at the End of Its Tether, in 1945. The tone is stark. The optimism that shaped the Time Machine and the War of the Worlds, even in their warnings, is largely gone. In earlier decades, catastrophe was often followed by renewal. Now he contemplates the possibility that humanity may simply fail. He has seen 2 world wars. He has seen industrial science produce both medical miracles and mechanized slaughter. He has seen flight transform from fragile experiment to airborne bombardment. He has watched political systems collapse, reform, and collapse again. In 1914, he imagined war might end war. By 1945, that belief has been battered. And yet, history moves again. In August 1945, atomic bombs fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world enters the nuclear age. Decades earlier, Wells had imagined atomic weapons in his 1914 novel The World Set Free. He described bombs of unprecedented destructive power reshaping global politics. What was once speculative fiction now becomes terrifying reality. Science has outrun imagination. In quiet rooms, newspapers unfold with stark headlines. The scent of paper and ink carries news of cities erased in blinding flashes of light. Wells understands immediately what this means. The scale of destruction has changed permanently. Humanity now possesses the means of its own extinction. His lifelong argument that global governance is necessary feels more urgent than ever, but he is tired. His body weakens even as his mind remains sharp. On 13 August 1946, in London, Herbert George Wells dies. There is no grand spectacle, no dramatic final speech, just the stillness of a room, the quiet close of a life that spent decades imagining futures. Wells' influence does not fade with him. Writers across the 20th century build upon the foundations he laid. Science fiction, once dismissed as sensational or trivial, becomes a major literary force. Films project alien invasions onto cinema screens. Radio dramas recreate Martian landings. Television imagines distant planets, time travel, dystopian states. Every spaceship owes something to him. Every time machine carries his blueprint. Every alien invasion echoes his reversal of empire. But his legacy extends beyond genre. He insisted that fiction could interrogate society, that stories about the future are arguments about the present, that science is not merely technical, it is moral. He forced readers to confront uncomfortable possibilities. What if class divisions harden into biology? What if science ignores ethics? What if empire experiences its own vulnerability? What if progress accelerates beyond wisdom? Walk through modern London today, and you still hear the layered sounds of Wells's life. The rumble of trains, now electric, the hum of aircraft overhead, the murmur of crowded streets filled with global voices.